Welcome to this meeting of Citizens for Informed Land Use, or as we prefer to call it, CILU. This is the CILU presentation on the joys and concerns of beekeeping. Have you ever wanted to know more about honeybees or how they impact our environment, or is beekeeping for you? This is the presentation for you to be here. So we're so grateful to have everybody come here tonight and be with us. We have Mr. Mike Haberland is going to be the presenter, but first I wanted to introduce myself. I am Karen Strickland, and I am the co-president of CILU with Regina Crisione, who is also here now. We work closely together to promote CILU's mission. Thanks to our CILU tech person here, Mary Rose Little, who is backing us all up. So I'm thankful for you all to be here with me. CILU is a nonpartisan grassroots homedale organization that has been working since 1998 to protect our open space and natural resources. Our mission is to promote thoughtful land use decisions, protect our natural resources, and promote good government decision-making based on open communication with an informed electorate and nonpartisan public debate. Over our 22 years of existence, we have been successful at advocating for land use decisions to preserve our open spaces and parks, build nature trails, and protect our watershed. As you walk the trails of Bayonet Farm and the reminiscent property, you are walking where CILU members have planned and advocated and built. A vision for future trails for Homedale has been a trail starting at the headwaters of the reminiscent at Phillips Park and being able to walk all along the Swimming River, all the way through trails to Swimming River Reservoir, the source of many of our drinking water. We hope, if you like this presentation, you will consider joining CILU. Now next month, I'll put that at the end of the meeting. This is page 3. So, as part of educating ourselves on the natural resources we enjoy, we are fortunate to have environmental expert Mike Haberland, Associate Professor of Rutgers University, here to talk to us. He has a master's degree in ecology from Rutgers. In addition to his education, he is the Agricultural and Natural Resources County Agent for the Cooperative Extension of Burlington County and the County Extension Department Head at the Cooperative Extension of Camden County. So he is truly an expert. He's going to explain the unique biology of the honeybee and its role in our natural world, how they organize their colony and make honey, and we can learn the tools beekeepers use to manage the beehive. So our meeting is being recorded and will be posted on Facebook and YouTube. And the speakers are very generous with their time, and we're very thankful for the people to come. If you have questions, hold them. Listen carefully, see if your questions are being answered. Otherwise, if you want to ask a question, you can type it in the chat. And then the tech people will be reading them. And then at the end of the presentation, we will ask Mr. Haberland the questions. So without further ado, I'm going to unspotlight myself and turn the screen over to Mr. Haberland. And it's all yours now.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. So do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, well, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with you. Of course, it's feeling like it's getting close to my bedtime since we just had the daylight savings time change, and it's actually what, 8:30. But we're going to talk about honeybees and beekeeping. This will be a pretty good overview of everything regarding honeybees and what it takes to be a beekeeper. So the first thing I like to do is make sure people know there's a difference between bees and wasps and hornets. People tend to think everything that's striped is a bee, and yellow jackets are not bees. Bald-faced hornets are not bees. You know, they're they're wasps, and they have a carnivorous portion of their life cycle, whereas honeybees or all bees are just herbivores. They only eat nectar and pollen. And a big difference is if we look up here, notice these wasps and hornets up here at the top 4, they tend to be shinier. They don't have much in the way of hair on them. Whereas the bees, honeybee here has a lot of hair, bumblebees covered with hair. And hair is very important for bees because all bees have these branched hairs, and that helps trap pollen. Again, because that's their food source, pollen and nectar. So all bees have, and I hope this thing isn't automatically going to switch on me. Here we show in the center the honeybee, which is the only introduced bee in the nation. All these other bees are native bees, and they're various sizes, various colors. You can see there's a lot of different styles of native bees in the US. In New Jersey, we have around 450 different types of bees. And also bees have different types of nests. And tonight we're talking about honeybees. A native honeybee or a feral honeybee would nest in a tree normally. And it would look like this in the lower left-hand side. So when you see these big hanging balls in the tree, that's a bald-faced hornet. And then you see these paper wasp nests up here that you might find under your eaves. Those are yellow jackets, all kinds of, and a variety of different wasps. Also, yellow jackets like to nest in the ground in empty rodent burrows. So you might get a surprise digging in your backyard and uncover a yellow jacket nest. So now we're going to look at the anatomy and biology of the honeybee. So a honeybee is a true insect. That means it has 6 legs, and its body is divided up into 3 regions: the head, the thorax or chest area, and the abdomen. And on the head, that's where we find the big eyes. And like all insects, honeybees have thousands of individual lenses that make up their compound eye. And depending on if it's a male, a worker, or a queen, they have a different amount of lenses in the eyes. The queen has the fewest lenses at 3,000, and the males have the most at about 9,000. And as you notice, there are hairs that grow out between the lenses of in the eye, and those hairs serve important functions. They tell wind direction, wind speed, the flight speed of the bee, and because they are hairs, they also collect pollen on their eyes. One thing about honeybees is they have excellent motion detection. It's called a high flicker threshold. So when the bee is flying along, it sees things like in individual snapshots. So when we watch a movie, we're seeing it at 24 or 30 frames a second, and it looks like a nice smooth motion to us. That's called our flicker threshold of 24. And honeybees have a flicker threshold of 150 to 300 frames per second. So they see what we see as a movie, they would see as individual pictures. And that helps them when they're flying along at 12 to 15 miles an hour to spot food items, so different floral sources that they're looking for. The other thing, because they have this excellent motion detection, it means you want to move slowly around the hive. If you're moving erratically or quickly, that triggers defensive reactions by the bees. But if you move slowly and calmly, the bees tend to remain more calm. Bees also see color, similar to the way humans do. However, if you'll notice from this chart, bees don't see the color red, which we do. However, bees see ultraviolet light, and they also detect polarized light, which we don't. The other thing in this slide, if we look over on the left, you'll see 3 rudimentary eyes that sit on top of the head, and these are called ocelli. Each one is an individual lens, and the bees use these in navigation. They help to collect the polarized light from the sun. So I said the bees can detect ultraviolet light. So if we look at the flowers on the left-hand side of these pictures, that's how the human eye would see them. And on the right-hand side, that's how the bees would see them. And certain flowers that need pollinators to come and spread the pollen around for reproduction have developed this ability to reflect this dark patch down around the pollen and the nectar in the center of the flower, and that helps guide bees down to this floral source. So if they follow that down, then they expect to get a food reward. Basically, the bee's entire body is just full of sensory functions, but the main functions are on the antennae. They have over 170 odor receptors on the antennae, and they detect things such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, moisture content, pheromones. And this is very important because remember, they live in a dark cavity. Either it's a beekeeper's beehive, or it's the cavity inside a tree, which is where they evolved to work in. So they need to have good senses. Being in a dark trap box, it's important to know how much oxygen you have, how much carbon dioxide, because remember, they're breathing air just like we do. And so it's important that they know what these levels of gases are. And also, the antennae is used just like a pair of arms and hands. So they touch everything with their antennae, inside and outside of the hive. They have jaws, and those jaws are used for a variety of things, to eat pollen. They're very important for cutting and shaping the wax, which is what the wax comb is necessary for them to store food and raise young. They clean themselves, groom themselves, and they also fight with their jaws. They have a relatively long tongue, and they suck up nectar and water with the tongue. And their tongue is similar to ours in that it detects sweet, sour, bitter, and salt. So they can detect a range of different flavors, just like we can. If there's not a lot of nectar, they can lap it up. The tongue goes in and out, lapping it up. But if there's like a large amount of nectar, they can sort of bend their tongue to make a bit of a trough, and they can actually like suck up that nectar. Now we're going to move down to the chest or thorax area. So this is where the legs are attached, and also honeybees have 2 pairs of wings. So 2 wings on each side. But when we see the bee flying, it looks like it only has 1 pair of wings on each side, 1 set of wings on each side. That's because when the bee goes out to fly, it actually hooks its wings together. So it has these little hooks, and the smaller wing pops out. It lays on the bee's back while it's in the hive, and then that pops out and it kind of velcros together with the larger wing, and then the bee takes off flying. And when it comes back into and lands at the hive, it unvelcros its wings and lays them across its back. So it's kind of like the planes on an aircraft carrier, the way they can fold their wings so they can don't damage them, and they can store more things closer together in the ship. It's the same way with the honeybee. Can you imagine trying to walk around inside the hive with 30,000 bees? If your wings are all sticking out to the sides, you'd end up mangling your wings. So here we have a unique pollen collection feature. This is found in honeybees and bumblebees. It's called the Pollen Basket, and it's a flattened area on the rear legs. And this is where the bee stores its pollen for the trip back to the nest or hive. So you have these coarse hairs on the outside of this flattened portion of the leg, and its body gets covered with pollen when it's on the flower. It uses its front legs to comb through its hair to collect the pollen, and then it mixes the pollen with a little nectar from its honey stomach to moisten it, and then it sticks it in the rear leg. And you can see in the lower right-hand picture, it looks kind of wet and shiny because it is wet. If they tried to fly with the dry pollen on their leg, it would just all blow off and they'd get back to the hive and there wouldn't be any pollen left. And you can see those bees that are flying in, look at the size of that pollen that they're carrying. They actually pack a large amount for their body size that they can bring back to the hive. Now we're going to look at the abdomen, and this is an area where we find the breathing spiracles. So being an insect, honeybees have a hard shell around their body, but it's made in sections with and in between those sections are a fleshy, softer area, so they can flex and bend, and when they breathe, they can expand. So these spiracles, these holes through the hard exoskeleton, are like flapper valves. So as they expand their abdomen, they suck air in, and as they contract their abdomen, it blows air out. So a pretty simple breathing system. Now, at the end of the abdomen, that's where we have the stinger. And as you see here, the stinger is not made up of one harpoon-shaped stinger. It's actually 2 serrated blades, and it's surrounded by this cardiac muscle. So this is a smooth muscle that continues to contract after the stinger is pulled out. So you probably all know when a honeybee stings you, those barbs grab hold of your skin and it rips this chunk of muscle out of the bee's body. So the bee's going to die after it stings you. But notice that even though it's not attached to the body anymore, it's still contracting, and those blades are moving up and down. They're digging a little deeper and a little deeper. Plus, notice how they keep pumping more and more venom into their prey, well, whatever they stung. So it's important, if you do get stung, that you want to get the stinger out as quickly as possible to limit the amount of toxin that goes into your body. So how do you do that? Well, one thing, you don't want to grab a hold of that muscular bulb to rip it out, because if you squeeze it, you're going to squeeze all that toxin into you. So you want to scrape it off, and they scrape off pretty easily. If you have a fingernail that's long enough, you could just scrape it out. They always demonstrate this with a credit card. I don't know why, because I don't carry a credit card with me when I'm working on the beehive. But in the lower right-hand corner, as a beekeeper, I don't go into the apiary without my hive tool. And it has a flattened edge that we use to pry apart the boxes. So the beekeeper always has a hive tool with them. And so that's what we're going to use if we have to remove a stinger. So here are the 3 different types of bees that we find in the hive. On the left here, this is the worker bee. They're all females, and they are the most numerous. They make up about 85% of the hive. The middle, these are the males, also called the drones. They'll make up between 15 and 18% of the hive. And notice, they are the only ones where the eyes touch at the top of the head. There's a little gap between the eyes for the worker and a little gap for the queen, but the males, the eyes actually touch. So if you have trouble figuring out which one you're looking at, that's a way to tell. Also, the drones don't have a stinger, so they can't sting you. On the right is the queen. So she's the largest bee in the hive, always the longest. She has that great big abdomen. You know, that's because she lays a lot of eggs. That little greenish white dot, that's put on by the beekeeper. We would call this a marked queen. And that just makes it easier for us to find her on a frame of a couple thousand bees all crawling around. And you're trying to pick out this one queen. So it's a little dab of paint helps. And this is what I'm talking about. So this is a good frame of bees from, let's say, the middle part of May to, the end of June. That's when your population is the largest. You can see there's tons of bees, thousands of bees, and you're trying to find the queen, who really, other than being a little bit larger, doesn't look a whole lot different. So you can see where that daub of paint comes in handy. So how does, let me take a second here. I need to hide this panel. That wasn't the right panel. Okay. So what does the hive depend on? So number one, the egg laying ability of the queen. So you need to have a good queen who's laying lots of eggs. Is there space available in the hive? That means, is there available comb? Because the bees use the comb for everything they do. The queen lays eggs in the comb, and the workers store nectar and pollen in the comb. So you need to have that space. And you also have to have a good food supply coming in. Trying to get this, there we go. So honeybees undergo complete metamorphosis. So they're similar to a butterfly in this way. They even have a little silk cocoon. Now, we never see that silk cocoon because it happens underneath a wax capping, so that all occurs out of sight. But here you could see the queen goes in, she lays an egg. After 3 days, that egg hatches. The workers start feeding the young larvae, and you can see what young larvae look like in this picture. And they're surrounded in this picture by a white milky substance that's called royal jelly. As the larvae gets larger and larger, when it's about 8 days old, it gives off a pheromone signal that tells the worker bees to cap that cell, and then the larvae will turn into a pupa and spend the next about 8 days or so, or up to 16 days actually, developing into an adult. And when it hatches out, it will be a fully formed adult. So here we see, for a beekeeper, it's important to know the length of time these different members of the hive hatch out at. So a queen, even though she's the biggest, she hatches out in only 16 days. Because it's so important to have a queen in the hive, that queen, if they lose a queen, they need a queen as fast as they can get it. So it takes 16 days for a newly egg-laid queen to hatch out. The worker, it takes 21 days, and then the drone takes 24 days. So here we have a worker brood. So all this over here, this is capped worker brood. So you can see it's kind of flat across the top, relatively flat. And over here we have worker larvae. And this is normal. This is how a queen would lay. She usually starts from about the center of a frame and works her way out in kind of an arcing fashion. And the developing young get younger and younger as you move out to the side. And when we get out to this area, this is where we would be looking for eggs. So some facts about the queen. Her biggest role is to produce eggs and to release the queen pheromone, which signals the hive that she's in good shape and that everything's okay. And so if you look in this picture here with the queen, you'll notice all these worker bees surrounding her, and they're all touching her with their antennae. They're getting queen pheromone from her body, and they're also licking her, and then they'll take this and spread it around the hive. So it's important that a queen produces a lot of pheromone so the bees know that she's in good shape, and they can go on and with their work, and they don't have to worry about raising a new queen. Under normal conditions, a hive is only going to have one queen. If you have multiple queens, they tend to battle to the death. And a queen does have a stinger. Now, her stinger won't pull out the way the workers will. So she can sting multiple times, but the only thing she uses her stinger on is to kill other queens. So the queen has the longest lifespan of the bees, and she'll live, 2 to 5 years. So, and that's what that has been historically. Now we've noticed that queens that are 2 years old, if they're in your beehive, you probably want to get a new queen, because they don't tend to last much longer than that nowadays. There are a lot of environmental stresses on the hive and on the queen. And notice the queen, from spring through summer, she can lay 1,500 plus eggs a day in the hive. So they need to have lots of comb for her to, lay her eggs in. So this shows the development of a queen. And what I want to show you is so here's our worker cells. Here's the, worker cells. The honeycomb is horizontal. So because the workers and the drones are smaller, they can actually grow in this horizontal comb. But that's not large enough for a queen to grow. So they make these special queen cells that hang vertically. And notice they're hanging vertically down along the bottom. They need more space, so they hang vertically. Here we can see a queen laying eggs in the comb. And that's another reason why, she's got this long abdomen that's just full of ovary tubules. So she has around 370 ovary tubules that each make eggs. So she's constantly making eggs. And that long abdomen can reach down and deposit one egg in the center of a cell. And notice this is nice, bright white honeycomb. So that means it's first year. It's just been made this year. So there hasn't been any, it's still nice and white. As it gets older, it starts to turn yellow as the bees are walking on it. Also, in areas where they're raising the brood, the silk cocoon gets laminated up against the walls after the worker hatches. So it kind of becomes more like a sheet of plywood in certain areas of the hive. So this is a drone. So larger than the worker and very barrel shaped. They're kind of very husky. Again, they don't have a stinger. So you can pick one up if you want and not worry that you're going to get stung. So, and they develop from an unfertilized egg. So the queen lays an egg that only has her set of DNA in it, and it doesn't have any male DNA. So a drone does not have a father. It has a grandfather, but it doesn't have a father.
Huh.
And they also don't do anything in the hive. They don't forage for food. They don't help build comb. They don't defend the hive. They don't have a stinger. They're fed and cared for by the workers. So the only purpose for the males is to mate with a virgin queen from another hive. And then if they're successful with their 2-second mating, they die and fall to the ground. So many drones mate with a queen during her mating flight. So she wants to mate with between 10 and 20 males. And that's to set up diversity in the hive, because she never knows, just how good that male is that's mating with her. They don't have a chance to date for a couple of months and get to know one another. So she doesn't know if this male is really strong enough or carries the right genes to help ward off diseases and pests. So she wants to mate with a lot of different males with the hope that more males that mate with her are going to be healthier. The other thing that happens to the males is if you have a drought in summer and always when cold weather for the winter is approaching, usually by the end of October, middle to end of October, the males all get kicked out. Because the males don't help collect food, they only eat food. If food is not available in the environment, such as a drought in August or, the winter time, the bees don't want the males there. They're just going to scarf down food that the workers and the queen could use. And it's actually kind of sad when you see this in the late fall. You'll actually see the workers grabbing a hold of a male and just dragging him out of the hive, and he's scratching his legs trying to climb back in, and they throw him off the entrance board. So the hive needs to have, they really want to have, roughly that 15% of the population in males. And so the beekeeper likes to keep track of, are the bees producing males in the hive? So we can easily do that because the cells that the males are developing in pop out from the face of the comb. So they look like a little silo or a little bullet popping out. So you can see from this picture, it's easy to see the male cells. So the workers are always female and typically not able to reproduce. So they do have a rudimentary ovary system, but as I mentioned, the queen has roughly 370 ovarioles, whereas the workers have about, say, between 5 and 10. So they do have a rudimentary system, but typically they can't reproduce. And a colony, a good healthy colony, will have between 20,000 and 40,000 workers. And from spring through summer, the workers have a relatively short lifespan, about 4 to 6 weeks. But then in the fall, towards the end of September and going into October, the bees create a winter worker bee. It's a whole different bee that has a lot more fat bodies in it, and they are made so that they can help the bees to overwinter. Honeybees are the only bees that overwinter as a colony. So while the colony number does shrink a bit, it still stays as a colony, and they overwinter in a cluster, and they'll all huddle together and generate heat, and they'll generate so much heat that the center of that cluster can be roughly 92 degrees. So again, workers are all females, and they come from fertilized eggs, and they do everything: store and collect food and water, tend to the queen, build the wax comb, do the housework, feed the larvae, maintain the temperature of the hive, and they also do the guarding. So the one thing, even with all the work that they do, at least they get promotions. So their tasks change as they get older. So the first thing they do is emerge from the cell, and then they turn around and they start cleaning. They'll clean out their cells, clean out other cells. They'll start learning how to beg for food and find out where food is in the hive. And it's important for the first 10 days of an adult bee's life that they eat a lot of pollen, because the pollen develops their hypopharyngeal gland in their head, which is what produces the royal jelly. Royal jelly is a very high protein liquid that is fed to all of the larvae for the first 3 days of their lives. Then it's only fed to the queen for the rest of her life. And after 3 days, the workers and the males are fed a mixture of honey and pollen and what they call worker jelly. So as a young adult, also between, its first 20 days of life, it's a house bee. So it's doing a lot of chores around the house. And one of the things they do is these house bees will go meet the foragers that are coming back from nectar collection at the entrance, and they'll transfer that nectar from the forage bee to the house bee. And then the forager can turn around and fly back out and continue to forage. And then the house bee will climb up on the comb and deposit the nectar into the honeycomb. The other thing that these house bees do, this is the prime time, 12 to 17 days old, for wax production. And they secrete these sheets of wax underneath their abdomen, and they're like sheets of the old stick bubble gum. And they have a hook on one of their legs. They reach back, they grab one of these sheets of wax and bring it up to their mouth. They work it in their mouth, they warm it up, make it pliable. And then once it's warm and pliable, then they'll use it in the hive for one of 3 things. Number one, they need to make comb. So if we look in this picture, here we have empty comb in the center. So they can't do anything without comb for storage. So the first thing they want to do is make sure they have enough comb. The second thing, this whitish comb, this is the wax capping. So they use the wax to make a thick capping over top of the developing pupa. So that's secondary importance. And then thirdly, once the honey, that nectar that they brought in, nectar has about 79% moisture content when they collect it. So they bring it back in, and in order to turn it into honey, they have to fan it to get it to dry out a bit. And when that moisture content gets below 18%, that's considered honey. And then they'll put a wax coating over top of it, because if you leave it exposed, honey will collect water. It's hydroscopic, so it sucks moisture from the air. So it's summertime and it's humid, it would pull moisture from the air and it would start to ferment and ruin the honey. So they put this thin layer of wax over top of it. Guarding the hive begins about day 18. So they guard all the entrances. They challenge any bees that are trying to get in. Any bees that don't smell right will get attacked. However, if you're a bee from another hive and you show up at a strange hive, but you've got food on your body, so you've got nectar in your honey stomach, or you've got pollen on your legs, well, if you're bringing food, then it's likely they'll let you in. So foraging begins 21 days after emergence. And here are the 4 things that they forage for: nectar, pollen, water, and propolis. So we know nectar, that's that sugary liquid that the plants have. Pollen, the male reproduction part. So this is where they get their protein from. Nectar provides the carbohydrate source, nectar and honey. Pollen, protein, water. They need water. They use it for cooling. They use it for just general drinking. They also use water to thin out the honey when they go to eat it from the hive. The fourth thing is propolis. And if you don't know what that is, you see on these frames down here, this orangish looking rust colored material. So it's plant resins. So a violinist or someone who plays a string instrument often uses resin. If they use a bow, yeah, that's what it is. It's plant resin. And in the summertime, when they're collecting this, it's like chewing gum. It's when it's hot out, it's very pliable and it's really sticky. But then as the weather cools down, it hardens and becomes, really tough to break apart these frames to check in the hive. But it's very hygienic. So the thing about propolis is it's good for disease prevention in the hive, and the bees use it. They'll coat their hive in nature. When they live inside a tree, they actually coat all the walls of the tree with propolis. So it's kind of a bane for the beekeeper because it's very sticky and a little messy to deal with, but it's actually a good thing to have in your beehive. It makes for a healthier hive. So when the bees go out and find a great flower source, they bring back nectar or pollen, they want to communicate with their hive mates where that source is, because they want those girls to go out and collect everything that's there. So they do this with a dance. Now, if it's really close, say within 50 yards, they'll do something called a round dance, and that's this one over here. It's kind of like a compressed figure eight. But when it's a further distance, greater than 100 yards, they do something called the Waggle Dance. So they'll go in one direction, and when they come back in through the middle, they wag their abdomen like this bee is doing down here. And it's not a slow wag. They call it the Waggle Dance, and you might have the feeling that it's like a dog wagging its tail, but it's not. It's really rapid. It's more like a vibration of the abdomen. And then the bee will come around in the opposite direction and come back through here and wag its abdomen. Whoop. And the amount of time that it's wagging its abdomen, that tells the bees the distance from the hive that the food source is, and the direction, the angle that it is dancing in tells the bees to go in this far in this direction from the sun. So the bees know where the sun is, and in the hive, the sun is always up. And this changes, this angle will change throughout the day as the sun moves across the sky. So it's a very complex dance, and the bees actually do an exceptional job at finding the floral sources that a dancing bee gives them. Here we have a nice brood frame. So this is where the bees are raising their young. It's in the bottom of the boxes. And we see the brood down here. We see honey up in the corners, and this is pretty standard. So you want to have your carbohydrate source close by. And we can't see it here, but there's often a band of pollen right above the developing brood. So when they hatch out, they can go right up and start eating pollen. And here's a close-up. And here you can see, here's our developing brood. And then here's our band of pollen, that protein source the bees need. So when they hatch out from here as young adults, they can go right up here, get some pollen, and start building their hypopharyngeal gland up. And then above that, if they need the carbohydrate source, there's honey. So you've all heard about honeybee swarms. So honeybee swarms are actually the natural reproduction method of a colony. So reproduction in a colony is not those individual bees in the comb. It is actually splitting that whole colony in half. The old queen goes with that half the colony, and they fly off to make a new hive somewhere else, and they leave half the colony behind with some queen cells that will develop into new queens that will take over the old hive. So you will go from one hive to two hives. So that's how nature increases the number of honeybee colonies in an area. This happens in, here we say May to June, but actually in New Jersey, it would be April through June and into July. There are different ways this can happen. The colony gets too crowded. The queen's pheromone gets diluted, or she's an old queen. And the workers then are triggered to make queen cells. And once those queen cells are capped, the old worker leaves. And here you could see examples of a cluster. So when that swarm leaves, it just flies a short distance away, and it makes this swarm cluster. And that's where the bees were going to hang out for hours to a day, while the scout bees are out looking for a new location to take the whole hive to. So after so many hours go by, the scout bees come back, they report the location, they try to encourage other bees to go take a look at it, and the bees end up voting. And once the bees come to a consensus, they like one area over another, this whole cluster will just lift off and fly away in like a dust devil of bees. It sounds kind of like a 18-wheeler truck on the highway. It's actually fairly loud. But the bees in a swarm are very docile. So you don't have to worry about, they're not going to come after you because they're out in the environment. The only time you really worry about the bees is when you go up by their hive, because that's what they defend. The hive is their home and their property, and it's their food, and their young are there, so they defend that. But when you get out in the environment, say like flowers on a bush, it could be covered with bees, but they're not going to come after you because they don't own those flowers. They don't own that bush. So if you disturb them, they just move off and they go off to another flower. So now we're going to look at the beekeeping portion. This is what we call a Langstroth hive. So this was developed by Reverend Langstroth from Philadelphia back in the 1850s. And before this time, they used something called the skep, which was a woven basket, and it didn't have removable frames. The hive built a big jumble of comb underneath this wax or this reed woven structure, like an upside down basket, and you really had to rip out all the comb and destroy the hive in order to harvest anything. Well, Reverend Langstroth figured out that he could build this box and have a set of frames in it, and the hive, the bees would build this vertical comb in it, and he could just pull out these individual frames without destroying the beehive. So he could harvest honey and put the frame back in, and not kill off all his bees. And you can see on the left-hand side here, there are quite a number of components that go in to one of these hives. And we're going to take a look at those. So the first thing is the bottom board. And this is what the hive boxes sit on. And you can have either a traditional solid bottom board, or since the 1990s, they invented the screen bottom board. In the mid 1980s, a pest, a mite, the Varroa Mite, was introduced to Florida, and it spread throughout the country in about 5 years. So in response to that, somebody came up with the bright idea that if we put a screen on the bottom of the bottom board, when mites fall off the bees, they'll go through the bottom board and they'll be stuck. Usually you'll put a sticky board underneath this and the mites would get trapped on that. And that would be a method of mite control. So now people argue back and forth, should you use one or the other? And while the screen bottom board does help a little bit, it's not enough to solve the mite problem in a hive. And a lot of people use one or the other. I mean, it doesn't really matter, either one. So here we're looking at the boxes. So the boxes in a hive are just that. They're just wooden boxes, although now they're made out of styrofoam and some are made out of plastic. So they have different materials. The main difference is there's several different sizes. So here we're showing the traditional deep box, and next to it is what we call the medium box. And there is one that is only about 3/4 the height of a medium box. That's called a shallow, and they're too shallow. I think they'd be annoying to work with because they're just too small. But these two, the deeps and the medium, these are the most common boxes in use. And you could have them in 10-frame boxes, or you could have them in 8-frame boxes, depending on what you like. All the commercial guys are going to use 10-frame boxes, and a lot of those are going to be deeps. The thing about deeps is we tend to use those mainly in the brood chamber, unless you're a commercial beekeeper who has equipment to lift the honey box off, because one of these deep boxes full of honey weighs about 80 pounds. So if you're trying to lift that off yourself, it is a lot of weight. Whereas most of us use a medium box for honey because they tend to weigh 45, 50 pounds when they're full of honey. And you still feel that. I mean, that's still a good amount of weight. So here we're showing, here are the frames in a box. And this is what Reverend Langstroth found. It's called bee space. So the bees like to have only about 3/8 of an inch of space in between the frames. And as you notice, that's enough for 2 bees to be back to back on alternate frames. And that's what they like. If there's a bigger gap than this, they tend to fill it with wax or propolis. So the best thing to do is we always try to set our hives up so we have this 3-inch spacing all around. So here we show a couple of configurations of how beekeepers set up their hives. So the bottom part of the hive is called the brood chamber, and it doesn't matter if it's a deep box or a medium boxes, it's still called the brood chamber. And the traditional setup would be 2 deep boxes for the brood chamber, and then for your honey boxes, you'd use medium boxes on top of that. A lot of people don't want to work with those heavier, larger, deep boxes. So they will use all medium boxes for their entire hive. So in this case, you'd use 3 medium boxes for your brood chamber. This is where you hope all your brood's being made, and then your honey would be up above it. And you could have, here we have 2 medium boxes for honey, but you might have 4 or 5 boxes by the end of summer if you're in a good location. So a new beekeeper won't have any comb for the bees to work. So they might have sheets of foundation, and they can be either plastic foundation like this here, or they could be pure beeswax foundation. But they're all imprinted with this comb template, and that's to try to encourage the bees to build out the wax comb in that format. And over here on the right, this is our goal. You know, as a new beekeeper, we need to get wax comb onto this foundation in these frames. And this is what we spend a lot of time as a new beekeeper trying to get the bees to do by feeding them sugar syrup to stimulate them to build wax. Here we have, show you the inner cover. So this sits on top of the boxes, and this really is just to protect your outer cover from getting glued down to the top of the hive. The inner cover, the bees will use that propolis glue, and they will glue down this inner cover, and that's okay, because once you get your outer cover off, then you can use your hive tool to pop this inner cover off. But here's our outer covers, and you see this is called a telescoping cover in the upper left, and it's very difficult. You can't really get your hive tool up underneath to pop this lid off if it's propolized down. So you end up having to, whack it with your hand, pound it. And as you can imagine, that's not a good thing to do for a beehive. It kind of gets them upset. So the inner cover is what gets glued down, so you can easily lift your outer cover off. Here we show the smoker. So this is a really important tool for the beekeeper to have. So you basically set up a smoldering fire inside this metal can, and it's got that bellows on it that you're squeezing to blow the smoke out. And you can see Joel here is blowing a puff across the top. Now you don't want to blow it down into the hive box. You're blowing it across the top. You'll puff around the front entrance, and this covers up the pheromone smell from the bees, so it interrupts their communication. It also triggers them to go onto the frames to eat some honey, because that smoke could be a forest fire. And so if they have to leave their nest, they want to have some honey with them because they don't know where their next home would be. So the smoker is a way to help keep the bees calm. And here we have a selection of hive tools. Again, hive tool is a necessity. It's something we always carry with us. We use it to pry the boxes apart, to separate frames, so we can lift them out. And there's a variety of types, and you end up finding one that you like more than others, and that's what you'll use. You might have a couple for different tasks. Protective clothing. Here we have examples of different types of veils. So the veil is what goes over your head. And then you have a jacket or coveralls. Those are the parts that go over your body. And, you know, I always work with a veil. I like to have my head covered. Some people prefer to try and go work the bees without any coverings, and I'm not in favor of that. Just one bee stinging you in the eye can really mess up your eye. So to me, it's better just to be safe and wear one of these suits or jackets. My wife and I, we wear a jacket like these two guys have jackets with attached veils with two. This is a fencing veil. This is what we wear. There are various types of head veils that you can get. Here we have a full ventilated suit. So if it's a hot summer day, you can wear your shorts and a t-shirt and the breeze will blow through this suit, but it's multi-layered, so the bees can't sting through it. But they do make you warmer no matter what type you have. So I like to show this picture. So this is a smile with a veil and a smile by Michael, who didn't want to wear a veil. He wanted to work his bees with just a ball cap on. And you can see he got stung in the lip. So I tell my students, you know, if you've got a date for Friday night, this is not what you want to look like. So it's better if you wear your veil. Gloves are an option. A lot of people work bees without any gloves at all. I like to work, my wife and I both wear gloves when we work. The nitrile gloves are very good to work with because they're very dexterous. And all this honey and propolis, you get a lot of stuff on your hands. And so by wearing the nitrile gloves, you can just peel those off when you're done and throw them away. The leather gloves, I like when it's really hot out because my hands sweat a lot. So I'll wear leather gloves in the summer because they soak up the sweat. My wife doesn't have the problem sweating up the inside of her nitrile gloves in the summertime. So she's able to wear those. Now, the bees can sting through pretty much everything. So even these leather gloves, unless it's thick cowhide, they really can get through them. They just don't very often. So even the thin nitrile gloves, the bees can easily sting through them, but they tend not to. I don't think they like the taste or smell that comes off the nitrile gloves. But if you have a gap between your jacket sleeve and the end of the nitrile glove, the bees head right for that. So they seem to know that's there, and you will always get stung at that gap if it's there. So now we're going to talk about ways of setting up bee colonies for new beekeepers. So there's three ways that you can set up a colony. One of the most common ways is getting an out-of-state package. So this is 3 pounds of bees that come early. The other thing is a nucleus colony. So this is actually a small, usually a 4 or 5 frame colony that you can order from a producer, either from out of state or locally. And then you can always, if you catch a swarm, you can set up a new colony that way. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about swarms because you can't order a swarm. You just have to be lucky and be there where one's occurring. So here's what a package of bees looks like. It's 3 pounds of bees in a box, and there's a queen inside that box and a can of sugar syrup. All of these come from either one of the southern states or California. None of the northern states make packages because it's too cold up here for our winters last too long, so we don't have the big populations of bees early. So what you're going to do is you set up your hive when you get your package. You have your hive set up. You're going to open the box. You'll lift the queen out, and there is a queen cage in the middle of this clump of bees. So it's one of these style cages. And the bees in here are feeding the queen. They're getting her pheromone, and they're trying to adjust to her because she's a new queen for them. When they make these packages, the queen and the bees don't know each other. They just dump 3 pounds of bees from one or more hives into the box, and then they've bred some queens that are over in another holding area. They'll grab one of those queens and stick her in her cage into this box and then ship it up north. So it takes a few days for the bees, the worker bees, to accept the new queen. So you're going to put your new queen into your box. Make sure that the bees can access her. So you see that that little mesh screen is facing either up and down or to the side, so the bees can access her and they can get her pheromone and feed her. And then you're going to take these bees, you're going to tap that box on the ground, and that knocks all the bees to the bottom, and then you can just tilt them over your hive, and they'll come tumbling out like a bunch of marbles. And you may have to tap them a second time, rock it back and forth, and you'll dump those bees out. And any excess bees, if you just set the box, the package in front of the hive, the bees will climb out into the box after you put the lid on. And within an hour, all those bees will leave the box and go into the hive. It's important when you're starting a new hive to make sure that you're giving them a lot of food, as much food as they can take, because they need to make that wax comb. So you have to give them a lot of sugar water because that's what they need to stimulate their wax glands to produce the wax that they need to build the comb. Here we see a nuke. This is a nucleus box, the one in front here. So this is a 5-frame nucleus, and we're going to transfer it into our permanent hive. So we have our permanent hive set up here. We'll move these frames into this box. Now here's the huge difference between a package of bees and a nucleus colony. A nucleus colony is a fully functioning beehive. It's just small. So it has a mature queen who's actively laying, and the worker bees are collecting pollen and nectar. So you can see this is all pollen up here. So we have a good food source. We have honey up in the corners. And here we have brood, capped brood. And I know that this brood is all hatching out. So this used to be capped brood, but over the last day, it's all hatched out. You know, that's why it's empty in the middle. And so this is just a small colony of bees. So that's the benefit of a nucleus hive, a nucleus colony, is that they're all working together. They're already a colony. They like their queen. They're working together, so they're off and running. So a nucleus colony builds up a lot faster than a package colony does. So when we pick up our nucleus colony, we bring it home, we set it on the bottom board where we're going to have our permanent hive, and we open it up and we let it sit there for a day or two, and those bees are going to orient to that spot. They're not going to fly away because their queen is inside that nucleus box. So they're going to come out, they're going to orient to the sun, they're going to reprogram their navigation system, and they're going to start going out to forage in the environment, and they'll come back to this spot. So after a day or two, you move that nucleus colony to the side, you put your permanent box on the bottom board, and then you're going to transfer those frames from the nucleus box into the middle of your permanent hive. You'll add food meaning syrup, and put the lid on, and it'll start developing and increasing. And this colony, because it's a nucleus colony, is going to build up very quickly. So you have to be ready to put a second story on, probably in about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. Now we're going to talk about honey, because that's why a lot of people want to have bees. You know, they want to get some honey out of it. And this is what a frame of pure honey looks like. So this is a deep frame. This is probably about 8 pounds worth of honey on one frame, which is why when you have 10 frames in a deep box, you have 80 pounds. And so that's a huge amount of weight to deal with. But this is a beautiful frame of honey. And you notice it's coated with that wax capping. And so when you go into a box to remove frames of honey, you may imagine the bees aren't happy about that. So there are different ways we use to get the bees off the honey. The simplest method is to have a separate covered box off to the side. You pull out a frame of honey, you shake it, probably have a bee brush like they do in that upper picture. Shaking gets most of the bees off. You could give it a few swipes with the bee brush and then put it in that box off to the side and quickly put a cover over it. The other thing you can use are these bee escape boards. You put them under your box of honey in the afternoon, and during the night, the bees go down to the bottom box and they can't get back up the next morning into the honey box. So you can just lift that off and take it away. Here we see, we have a blower. Some people will just take that box off and try to blow all the bees off. We find that is really tends to be more of a battle because the bees will come right back. So what we use is something called a fume board. You put a substance that the bees don't like on it, and you put it on top of the honey super, and that drives the bees down into the lower boxes. And then you can take your honey super off. We use this honey bandit that smells like almonds. So it's not it doesn't smell really bad, but the bees don't like it. So that's a pretty easy way. It takes about 5 minutes to drive the bees off. Then we'll use our blower to get any stragglers. So then you have to take your bee or your honey into a building that the bees can't get into, because they will definitely be following you to your car, trying to get into your vehicle. So you want honey tight windows. And then when you get to your extraction room, you have to scrape off that wax capping. So the bees put that on to keep water from, getting absorbed into the honey. So we have to get that off so we can extract our honey. And there are different tools you can use. This is a uncapping knife. This is an actual bee knife. Some people will use like a butcher knife to do that. This is called a honey scraper. That has these really sharp little tines, and you just scrape it through to scrape the cappings off. And once you get those cappings off, you put it in your extractor. And these are two different types. This is a radial extractor. This is a tangential, but you can see spinning around. So you either have this is a motorized extractor here off to the left. This is my extractor. It's a hand crank extractor. So you get a lot of exercise when you're extracting the honey. And as this is spinning around, extracting, it's flinging the honey by centrifugal force out onto the walls of this tank, and then that is dripping down into the bottom. So we leave the spigot open so we won't build up a deep layer of honey. That'll slow the spinning down. And we put a filter strainer underneath. You can see the bits of wax that get trapped in the strainer. And we have our honey bucket underneath here. So we usually use a double stack strainer, a little coarser one on top, and then a finer one underneath. You don't want to use anything too fine if you'd like to have pollen in your honey, because a super fine filter will filter out pollen. So we always use something that's a little coarse on the bottom so that we have pollen in our honey. And then you have another honey gate on your bucket, and that's what you would open up to fill up your jars of honey with. And that's all there is to raw honey. Just spin it out into the bucket, filter out the wax, and fill up your jars. Okay, so that ends my presentation, and I can take questions.
We're listening. I just don't think everybody's being bashful.
Karen, does anybody have any, did any questions come in?
I need to unmute myself. So that's the first step always. So now I'm putting us on spotlight. I don't see any questions here. There haven't been, I've gotten some compliments. Very informative. Thank you very much. I have to say, I never realized there was so much with bees and honey and all the steps. And I was thinking, oh, this might be a nice project, but I'm not so sure. All right, so here there is a question. Do honeybees compete with native honeybees for resources?
Okay, so there are no native honeybees. There are native bees, but there's only one that's called, the non-native honeybee is the only one called a honeybee. So of course they do compete for resources, but the native bees are actually probably more efficient and specialized than the honeybee. The honeybee is not a specialized feeder, so it can bounce around to multiple types of flowers. A lot of the native bees are specialists. And the bumblebees are out from the spring through the summer, but a lot of your other bees, they're only out for a few weeks. The orchard bees, like the mason bees, they come out in the spring. They're your big fruit tree pollinators. And then when the fruit trees are done, they're done. And they go back into hibernation. The older bees will die off, and the developing brood overwinters until the next spring. So a lot of the native bees have a pretty short time when they're out foraging. But yeah, there is competition, of course, because all the bees are foraging for the same thing, honey and nectar. But you do see them on the flowers. You don't see them fighting, but you do see when a bumblebee lands on a flower, the other bees often will move off to another flower. So, bumblebees are bigger, a lot bigger, even though they don't seem aggressive. I think maybe they would just push the other bees out of the way. But I have seen honeybees and native bees foraging on the same flowers at the same time. So there's that competition because they're both eating the same food. But the unfortunate thing is we can easily make more honeybees because we manage them in boxes. It's easy to take one box of bees, and during the course of a summer, you could easily split it into 4 colonies, and you can raise new queens. We can't do that with native bees. So when we destroy habitat for native bees, they're gone. So that's why we encourage people who live in an urban environment, any planting you do of native plants helps native bees. Even if you think it's a small amount, a small garden, it's helping native bees. You'll be surprised. We started, when I moved here and was started with Rutgers, we put about a 60 square foot, a very small rain garden out off one of our downspouts in the backyard. And that first year, it had native bees on it. And so we were like, well, that's cool. So each year, my wife has added about a foot diameter or a foot radius to it, and we plant more and more native plants. We have probably about 12 different species in that now. And oh my gosh, we have so many native bees that use that. Now it's so, if everybody did that, even though it's a small space, we'd all really be helping the native bees.
So there are 2 questions here directly related to that. So one is, what type of flowering trees or plants would you recommend? And then if we want to encourage bees, but not brave enough to do our own, how best support the population? So maybe, and it's also any particular plantings.
Okay, so number one, if you already have trees, if you have maple trees are very important for pollinators. The red maples are just, those buds are ready to start popping now. And when they open up, that's a great source of pollen for the bees. That's the early source in New Jersey. And then willows, tulip poplars they have a huge amount of nectar in them. They're a little bit later. Basswood. So if you have any of these trees, don't cut them down. Those are great trees to have for the bees. Plus they're vertical, and they have as much habitat in one tree as maybe an acre of flowers if you have a mature tree. So it's a lot easier to have a lot of pollinator food on a mature tree than it is to have acres of land to put it in. But then flowers. So our favorite flowers are mountain mint and anise hyssop. The bees, all the bees, native bees and honeybees, absolutely go bonkers on them. It's like catnip for bees. Mountain mint, number one. That's the number one plant. And then there's tons of the coneflowers. The bees love coneflowers, coreopsis. Plants that are good to have for the period of like August on, or your asters. The bees get a lot of food from asters, especially New England asters, New York asters. Goldenrods are important, and goldenrods don't give you hay fever. That's ragweed. And sneezeweed, which is interesting. I don't know. It's probably because it comes out at the same time as ragweed, but sneezeweed is beautiful yellow flowers, and they like moist places. So if you have a damp place, that's great, and they attract a lot of bees. So there are quite a few plants, and you want to have things that our gardens are starting to bloom now. We actually have some little irises popping up now, and it's going to keep blooming through October. So that's how you want to plan your garden, to have plants that bloom in sequence all summer long. There is the site, the New Jersey, what is it? New Jersey Yards. They're out with, they're associated with the Barnegat Bay program. What's it called, Debbie? Yeah, Debbie, she said it's just called New Jersey Yards. That's what we think. So if you Google that, they have this awesome little program that will help you to select plants, and has lots of, what is it? Yeah, Jersey Yards. The other thing is there is a fabulous website by the Xerces Society, and it's spelled Xerces, and they have tons of free literature on plants for pollinators. They also have books that for a fee, but they have so much free literature, you know, you don't even need to buy one of the books. But it has lists of plants for the different areas of the nation. So I forget what they call our area, like, you know, the Atlantic coast, but excellent choices there. The Audubon Society also has lists of plants. So there are a lot of good plants, but it's important to get the native plants and not get the hybrid plants. And anything with a double flower, the bees can't access the pollen if it's there, and a lot of those hybrid plants don't even produce nectar or pollen, so they don't have any food at all. See, oh, did you somebody put up the Xerces Society link?
Oh,
That's
okay.
they have so much material.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so that is a very good.
Yeah, it's a real interesting question. Another interesting one is combined. It's is there concern with having a hive in your yard if you have kids and pets? And at the same time, would there be an opportunity, if you don't want to do the beekeeping yourself, but to let someone come and use your yard to keep bees?
Yes, to both of those. So it all depends on the size of your yard for, you know, kids and pets. If you have a decent, so we have about 1/3 of an acre, and we have that. He's embarrassed. He's camera shy. So we have at any time 2 to 4 hives in the backyard. We try to keep it at 2 because we're in a subdivision. But we have plants in between, so it's back by the fence, and then we have plants between the hives and the backyard. So what that does is when the bees come out, they shoot straight up. They go up about 10, 12 feet, and then they fly off and go forage. So they really don't spend much time in the backyard. It's not until the asters in the rain garden bloom at the end of summer, and there's not a lot of food out, that we actually have honeybees at our flowers in the yard. They don't really seem to like to forage close to the hive. They like to get away, 100 yards or more. I think it's easier for them when they do their dancing if the food source is further away than close by. So yeah, you have to teach your kids, proper human kids as opposed to pets you can talk to, and you can explain, the way how to work with a hive and not to go up and bother it. Pets, Cody, he used to come when we would to sniff around the hive, but we'd tell him to stay away. And bees are very noisy when they fly, and that seems to bother him. So he's learned he just stays away. He'll watch us from the lawn when we work the hives, but as long as you have a moderately sized yard so that you have space to separate the hives from the people and the pets. Okay, and then there was another question.
Well, there are a couple of questions here about like where would you recommend getting a hive in the middle of March, but either like I guess would either to buy a hive or allow your property to be used by someone else who's maintaining the hives.
Yeah. So if you want to let someone come use your hive and you don't know anyone, you can contact one of the local chapters of the Beekeepers Association. So in New Jersey, we have a statewide association that's broken up into, I think it's 7 chapters. So you would be dealing with the central chapter in your Monmouth County, right?
Yes, Monmouth County.
Yeah, say they're in Freehold. They meet in Freehold, well, in a normal year, but that's the main location for meetings. So you would contact them and say, look, do you know of anyone that would want to keep a beehive in our yard? And so they would usually send out an email to their membership, and you never know, there might be someone, just down the road from you, and they'll say, oh, that would be great. Because that's one thing, as a beekeeper, you're always looking for a place to put another hive.
How expensive is it to start a hive?
It is not cheap. So I tell people your first hive and all the equipment and everything is probably around $500. So it's the hive material, the wooden hive material itself for a full-size hive is between the cheapest in New Jersey is $155, and from there it jumps up to about $325 to $375. And then to get bees, that all depends on if you get a package or a nucleus. Packages range this year from about $115 to $160 for a package. So you see there's a big range on packages, and then nucleus colonies range between $160 and $200.
So, and how much honey would a hive produce?
Well, your first year, nothing that you can take as a beekeeper. You have to leave it all for the bees to overwinter with. The bees need at least 60 pounds to overwinter for their, so the first year, they're probably going to need everything they make. Plus, you may have to feed them some more food to get through the winter. But then the following spring, they are really moving big time. And so after your first year, then you get between, I'd say on the low end, about 45 pounds. And then, you know, upward, maybe at an upper end, if you were in a really good location, I hear of people who've gotten 90 pounds from one hive. But I usually figure if I get 45, 50 pounds, that's pretty good. Last year we did pretty well. We were getting, I'd say 60 to 65 pounds per hive. We have a lot of honey right now.
So that's one of the questions here. It's very informative. I have a new appreciation of the work involved from the bees and the beekeeper. Do you sell your honey?
Yeah, we do sell the honey. We're quite reasonable for honey sellers, but
Well,
you know,
where
we're
can
all
they
the way
find
over.
you? Oh.
Yeah, we're all the way over in Gloucester County.
Oh.
So that's, yeah. Now, if people, we can always arrange, if people want a bunch of honey, we could meet folks someplace. We sell it at $6 a pound, which for a raw honey is on the inexpensive side.
Very good. All right. So if anybody wants his text email, we'll stick it down here. Is just two more questions. You're being really generous with your time. Really appreciate it. Is local honey better for you than honey from other states or countries? How local is sufficient?
I wouldn't buy anything from another country. There is a lot of problem with imported honey. It's very hard to detect people mixing sugar syrup with honey because they're both sucrose, and there is just a huge black market in illegal and adulterated honey. So if you see something cheap in the store, I would be very suspect of it. You won't taste a difference. I mean, honey made from sugar syrup is delicious. So when you're a beekeeper and you know you're working to get you're feeding a lot of sugar syrup to get them to build their comb, and you accidentally working a frame and you stick your finger in the honey, and it's sugar syrup because you've been feeding them gallons. So, but I encourage you to taste that because it is some of the best tasting honey there is. However, you can't sell it because you can only sell honey that's made from wildflowers because that's what people are expecting to get. But so if you want honey that has pollen in it, because a lot of people think that helps with their allergies,
right?
Then you don't want to you'd rather get something that's called raw honey. Getting it from a local beekeeper is really the best way to ensure that. Things that are on the shelf in the stores are, in order to keep them from crystallizing, they heat them up so that's like really thin, and they filter everything out of it. So they filter all the pollen out of it, and that helps keep it from crystallizing on the shelf. So if you can get something, if you know a local beekeeper, and there's, it seems at least in New Jersey, there are beekeepers all over the place in New Jersey. So it's much better to get the raw honey, what's called the raw honey.
So is the Rutgers email the one you want people to use when they contact you about buying honey? Can we put it here? Mike.haberland@rutgers.edu.
Actually, My wife is the one who sells the honey, so I should give you her email address.
Yes, I will put it in the chat.
And that is Working Girls Meadows
Oh,
2. Oh, she's checking. What is the actual
Girls.
email? Oh, Dhaber, Dhaber. Is there a number after that? Huh? Dhaber4@gmail.
Okay, I'm gonna write that here. DHABER4@gmail.com.
Yes.
Okay, and so I have to send that to everyone in the meeting. There it is, Dhaber4. Okay, there is one last question. You've been wonderful. How much tending does a hive need? How frequently?
Well, if you want to do a good job, well, we like to go in probably every week to week and a half in the spring, because there's a lot of changes that are going on. If you, in the springtime, if you wait a month to go in, then your hive may have swarmed on you. So in the springtime to the beginning of summer, you want to go in more frequently. And then after July, you can go in a lot less, like every 3 weeks. But yeah, it's the state rules are you only have to go in 3 times between March and October. And if you were to do that, then the queen that you have at the end of summer would not be the queen that you started out with, because they would definitely have swarmed. Yeah, it's better if you go in more often. There, especially nowadays, there's actually, we didn't talk about it, but there's a lot of pests and diseases that you have to look out for.
Thank you so very, very much. I think people noticed your Rutgers shirt, and there's a Beat Clemson sign here.
Uh-oh.
So I'm not exactly sure, but I think that's good. I think people are very appreciative of all this information that you've given. And so thank you, everybody, for coming to, did you want, there is this one last one that I missed when I was going through these, and it's, can you over-harvest the honey?
Yes. And by over-harvesting, I interpret that as meaning not leaving the bees enough for the winter. So that unfortunately is a common occurrence with new beekeepers. They want to harvest, they want to harvest that honey. But as I mentioned, you need to leave 60 pounds of honey for those bees to get through the winter. So if you take all their food, they're going to starve. And, you know, that's very expensive. So it's better just to, you know, your first year, just enjoy learning how to work with the bees, and then look forward to next spring, because that next spring, if you get those bees through the winter, they build up super fast, and they'll be out foraging and bringing in loads of honey. So much, they'll bring in so much honey that you have to put in 2 honey boxes by April. And they could fill those up in a matter of a couple weeks when that nectar flow starts. So yeah, just don't be greedy your first year.
Good. And do bumblebees produce honey?
Well, they do, but not in the same way that honeybees do. Bumblebees, they nest in the ground, and they actually make these like honey pots. So it's like a wax vessel with an open top that they'll fill with honey, and the bees can feed off of that. And So it's a little different structure, and they don't make nearly as much as a honeybee does because they die off every year. The old, everything dies off except for the newly mated queens. So in the fall, the virgin queens get mated, and then they find a place to overwinter under a leaf pile, in a crevice somewhere where they try to stay warm, and they just go dormant for the winter. And then that one queen hatches, warms up enough in the spring, she starts flying around, she finds a new nest location that she hollows out herself and starts getting food and then laying a few eggs and doing all this work herself until she builds up enough worker population that she can stay in the nest, and the rest of the bumblebees go out and forage for her. So it's a whole different lifestyle.
I can see that people would be willing to stay here all night and keep asking you questions, but we're going to stop it now. Thank you so very, very much, Mike, for sharing all your knowledge. We will make our backyards a home base for bees, I hope. So for everybody else, we hope you like this presentation. And if you would consider, think about joining CILU, and if you like this presentation, there's a good chance that CILU has had a positive impact on the quality of life in Homedale and your life due to our activism and defense of Homedale's natural resources. So if you would like to get involved in your community and meet some very nice people and hear some wonderful presentations like we had here, consider joining. So instead of a presentation next month, though, on Friday, April 16th, all CILU members are invited to join our annual membership meeting. First, we will be giving committee reports and then holding our election. A nominated slate of candidates is being sent out to CILU members. And after the election, we're going to do a Zoom session of Doodle Dude. He's going to teach us how to doodle and enjoy some friendship with our fellow CILU members. So thank you all again to our audience for attending and asking such great questions. Thank you, Mike, for a very informative session. And please consider joining CILU. Go to our website, www.homedale-cilu.org. Pay $20 and you too can become a member. Or visit us on Facebook at Citizens for Informed Land Use. And if you want to buy honey, dhake4@gmail.com. And so thank you all again, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.